Montana Territory, August 1883. Thunder cracked over the Bitterroot Range as Thomas Callahan pushed open the stable doors, the lantern in his hand casting a narrow glow across the hay-strewn floor. He had come to check on his new mare, a skittish bay he bought from a widow down in Missoula. What he did not expect was the pair of wide eyes staring up at him from behind the hay bales. The girl bolted upright, dress torn at the hem, cheeks streaked with dust and dried tears. She clutched a small carpet bag to her chest like it was all she had left in the world. "Do not scream," Thomas said, keeping his voice low and stepping back a pace. "I am not going to hurt you." The lantern revealed more of her slim frame, tangled dark hair, and a face that had once been powdered and made up but was now raw from travel and fear. She looked no older than 20, though her eyes held something older. Something tired. "I am not armed," she whispered. "Please do not send me away." Thomas crouched slowly, setting the lantern down. "You hiding from someone?" She nodded but said nothing. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "You got a name?" "Faye," she said.
Faye O'Riley.
He glanced at the carpetbag. "You alone?" Her mouth trembled, and she blinked hard. "I have 2 children," she said, voice shaking. "They are with a woman in town. She does not know I ran." Thomas straightened. His boots shifted in the straw. "You ran from your husband?" "I never met him." She gulped. "I answered a mail order ad back in Illinois. He sent for me. I brought my babies. We arrived 2 days ago, but when I saw him at the station..." She shook her head. "He was cruel.
Drunk.
He said he did not want the children. I took them and fled." Thomas exhaled slow. "You walked from town?" "Until I saw the edge of your fence. The stables were dark. I thought maybe. Just for the night." He looked at her again in the lantern's flicker. Not just afraid. Desperate. She had not eaten. Her shoes were worn thin. And those children, wherever they were, must have been just as scared. "You said they are with someone in town?" "A laundress. Miss Tilda. She offered to watch them while She trailed off. "I was going to try to find work. But no one hires a woman with 2 small ones." He looked at her for a long breath. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "Safe. I will ride into town in the morning, get your children." Her eyes welled. "You would do that?" "I do not leave women and children to fend for themselves," Thomas said. "Not out here." He left her there with a blanket and a slice of bread, posted himself outside the stable door with his rifle across his lap and the dog curled at his feet. The storm passed slow, and he did not sleep. By morning, the sun rose over the mountains with clear skies. Thomas saddled his gelding and rode hard into town. He found the laundress in a cramped back room behind the general store. She was wary at first until Thomas explained. Then she opened the door, and Faye's children came running out. The girl, barely 5, had hair in a single braid and clutched a wooden button like it was treasure. The boy, younger, had a thumb in his mouth and stared with wide brown eyes. "Bria and Boone," Tilda said. "Sweet little things. Their mama loves them fierce." Thomas knelt. "Your mama's waiting. I am going to take you home." It was not until he said home that he realized what he meant. Back at the ranch, Faye was outside the stable, hugging herself in the morning chill. When she saw her children galloping across the yard toward her, she dropped to her knees and opened her arms, sobbing into their hair. Thomas looked away, giving them their moment, but he felt something shift in his chest. Like the tightness he had carried for years had finally eased just a little. That night, he cleared out the bunkhouse, set up a cot, found some old toys one of his hands had left behind years ago. Faye cooked beans over the stove and bathed the children in a tin basin. Thomas watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "You have been kind," she said when the children had fallen asleep. "You did not have to." He shrugged. "I do not see it that way. You could have turned me out. I would not do that." She looked down. I do not know what comes next. You stay, he said. You get your footing. I have work if you want it. Cooking, cleaning. I pay fair. She glanced up, eyes soft. That would mean everything. He nodded. Then it is settled. In the weeks that followed, the ranch shifted. Faye moved with quiet purpose, washing dishes, tending chickens, mending shirts. The children played in the yard, barefoot and laughing. Thomas found himself lingering at the table longer, asking about her past, telling her about his. He had lost his own family in a barn fire 12 years back. Wife. Baby. Since then, he had kept to himself the land, the cattle. But Faye. She listened. She never pitted, just nodded and sat with him in the stillness. One evening, after supper, he found her standing on the porch, arms folded tight. You are shaking, he said. Just the wind, she replied. He stepped closer. You miss Illinois? She looked up.
No.
I never had a home there. Not really. He nodded. Well, this place, he looked out over the fields, the hills painted gold by the setting sun. It can be won, if you want it.
She smiled then.
Not wide, but real. I do want that. He reached out, brushed a thumb beneath her eye where a tear had caught. You're safe here, Faye. The children, too. She leaned into his touch. You have already changed our lives, Thomas. He shook his head. Seems like you changed mine first. And for the first time in years, he let himself believe in something more than land and loss. He believed in her. The first frost came early that year. By late September, the cottonwoods along the creek had turned brittle gold, and Thomas had begun checking the barn roof for leaks. He stood on the ridge one morning, hammer in hand, when the screen door clattered open below. Faye stepped out, apron dusted in flour, shielding her eyes against the sun. You have a hole near the chimney flue, she called up. I see it, he replied, kneeling to press in a fresh shingle. Should hold through winter. She lingered at the bottom of the ladder, arms crossed. There's a man in town. Says he's looking for a woman with 2 children. He asked around the mercantile. Thomas paused mid-swing. Did he give a name? She shook her head. Only said he came from Dakota Territory. Offered Tilda money for information. He climbed down, boots hitting the earth with a dull thud. You think it's him? I don't know. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands fidgeted in the folds of her apron. I never saw his face. Only read his letters. You said he drank. Wrote like a man used to shouting. There was a cruelty in his words even before we left. He wiped his palms on his trousers. I'll ride into town tomorrow. Quiet like. See what I can learn. She met his eyes. If he finds us, he won't. She nodded but didn't move. Boone's small voice called from inside, and she turned, but not before Thomas saw it fear, tight behind her eyes, held back for the sake of the children. That night, after the children were down, Faye sat on the stoop with a mending basket in her lap. The lantern beside her cast a soft halo on the ground. Thomas joined her, lowering himself onto the step without a word. I was 16 when I married the first time, she said, threading her needle. He was a cobbler. Gentle. Died during the coughing fever the year Boone was born. After that, I worked in a boarding house. Scrubbed floors until my knees bled. Thomas kept his eyes on the dark hills. You don't have to explain anything to me. I want to. She tied off the seam. I didn't answer that ad looking for love. Just some kind of shelter. I thought I could make it work. You're not to blame for any of it. She turned toward him. What about now? You took us in without asking for anything. Not even trust. Isn't that a little dangerous? He met her gaze. Maybe. But I know what it feels like to lose everything. I won't stand by while someone else does. They sat in silence then, the kind that settled easy between people used to long nights and hard truths. When she reached for the lantern, her hand brushed his. Neither pulled away. The next morning, he left before dawn. The trail into town was cold and quiet, frost clinging to the grass like dusted sugar. At the general store, he hitched his horse out back and went in through the rear door, nodding to Tilda. "He's still here," she said softly. "Lodging at the boarding house across from the livery. Doesn't talk much. Carries a pistol on his hip." Thomas kept his hat low as he crossed the street. Through the lace curtains of the boarding house front parlor, he caught a glimpse. Dark coat, wide shoulders, eyes that scanned every face that passed. No mistake. Dangerous man. He returned by midday. Faye was kneeling near the chicken coop with Bria, both of them laughing at a hen that had escaped the pen. She straightened when she saw him, the smile gone from her face before it had fully formed. Thomas dismounted. "He's still looking. Might be time for a decision." She stood still a long moment. "Could we leave?" "We could. But this land's mine. Yours too if you want it. I won't run unless you ask me to." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm tired of running." He nodded. "Then we stay. And we prepare." He added a second lock to the front door, moved the rifle closer to the hearth. At night, he walked the fence line. Faye never asked what he was looking for, but she left a lamp burning in the window. Every night after that. A week passed. No sign of the man on their land, but the wind carried unease. On the 8th day, Thomas returned from checking the northern pasture to find Boone on the porch, a daisy clutched in one hand and a tear streaked down his cheek. "He said Mama belonged to him," the boy whispered. He was outside the fence. Thomas crouched low. "What did he look like?"
Big.
"Black hat." "Mama told me to stay inside." Thomas stood slowly, heart pounding like hooves against hard dirt. He found Faye in the kitchen, hands pressed hard against the counter.
"He was here," she said.
"Didn't try to come in. Just watched. He'll come back." She nodded. "We'll be ready." She turned to him, and he saw something new in her than not just fear, but a kind of resolve. The quiet strength he'd glimpsed in her from the start, now sharpened to something fierce. "I won't let him take my children," she said. "You won't have to. Not while I draw breath." Her eyes met his, steady as stone. "I believe you." And for the first time, the word home didn't feel borrowed between them. It felt like something they'd made, and something they'd fight to keep. The dawn after the stranger appeared at their fence, a hush settled over the land that stayed long past sunrise. Even the roosters crowed half-heartedly, as if sensing the tension threaded through the soil. Thomas rose before the light touched the hills and saddled his horse without sound. He left a tin of coffee warming on the stove, the only note he knew Faye would need. By mid-morning, he returned with a deputy from town, a lean man named Elmer Crowley with a crooked nose and a coat that hadn't fit right since spring. He had a calm way about him, but his eyes missed nothing. Faye kept Boone and Bria in the back room while Elmer sat at the kitchen table, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Man fitting your description arrived in Hamilton 12 days ago," Elmer said, voice low. "Name of Cyrus Dent. Claims the woman he's looking for abandoned a legal agreement." Thomas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "She didn't sign anything binding." "Those letters weren't law." "True," Elmer said. "But he's got a way of talking folks into things. Says he's owed property. Spoke of children like they were cattle." Faye appeared in the doorway behind him, hands resting lightly on the frame. "Does he have kin in Montana?" she asked. Elmer glanced up. "None we could find. But he's got coin. Pays in gold. Men like that stick around till they get what they came for or lose interest." "I doubt he's the type to lose interest," Thomas said. Faye's face was unreadable, but her voice didn't waver. "I'll speak to him." "No," Thomas said, pushing off the frame. "You won't." Elmer raised a hand. "Let me try first. I'll make it known the land's posted, that he's not welcome near it. If he crosses the line again, we'll see it handled legal. Legal don't always stop a man like him, Thomas said. Elmer stood. No, but it gives me grounds to act if he does something foolish. After the deputy left, Faye stepped onto the porch, arms folded against the wind. Thomas joined her, setting a fresh log into the firewood bin. I need to do more than wait, she said. You've done plenty, he said. You got them little ones fed and smiling. That's more than most. She looked toward the pasture, where the cattle moved slow through the grass. He knows where I am now. That changes everything.
No.
It just means we watch closer. She turned to him. You trust Elmer to keep him away? I trust you more. Her eyes searched his face. Why? He hesitated. Then, because you didn't break when life tried to bend you. You held on. She looked down, brushing her fingers across the porch rail. I kept thinking if I stayed quiet, small, I could slip through unnoticed. But he found us anyway. You're not small, he said. You're here. That means something. That night, Faye didn't sit on the stoop. She stayed inside, sewing patches into Boone's trousers while Thomas read aloud from an old almanac, his voice rough but steady. Bria curled up on a bearskin near the hearth, eyes drifting shut. Boone lay beside her with a half-carved whistle in his hand, breathing slow. When the children had gone quiet, Faye set her sewing aside. You've never asked me what I want, she said. Thomas closed the book. I figured you'd say when you were ready. I want a home, she said. Not just shelter. A place that feels like it won't disappear next time a man decides he wants something. He nodded. You got that here. I want to stay, she said. But only if it's not charity. It's not. I'd raise them here, she said. If I knew we could make a life. Thomas stood, walking to the window. The moonlight stretched across the field, silver and still. You think I brought you and them here because I pitied you? She didn't answer. He turned. I brought you here because something in me knew you belonged. She rose slowly, stepping toward him. Then let me belong. He reached for her hand. Her fingers curled into his, without hesitation. No more running, he said. No more hiding, she replied. Outside, the wind stirred the dry grass, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint cry of an owl. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. They stood together in the hush, two people who had known loss, now choosing what came next. And neither let go. A dusting of snow came before the end of October, soft and early, clinging to fence rails and the backs of cattle like a warning. Thomas hauled wood into the lean-to while Faye stitched a wool lining into Bria's boots. The children had taken to the cold with the easy resilience of the very young, cheeks flushed and laughter trailing behind them as they raced along the porch. But Faye watched the tree line more often now. Late one afternoon, while Thomas was mending a broken gate near the south rise, Faye stepped out to the root cellar and found a note pinned to the door with a hunting knife. The handwriting was tight, slanted, and unfamiliar. She didn't touch it. She went straight to the barn, where Thomas was brushing down the mare. He's been here, she said. He looked up fast. You saw him? She shook her head. Just the blade. And a message. He followed her in silence. When they reached the door, he pulled the knife free and read what had been carved into the paper. His jaw set hard. He's not trying to talk, he said. He's trying to scare you. She met his eyes. It won't work. They burned the paper in the stove and kept the knife. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He sat at the window with a shotgun across his knees, watching moonlight pass over the fields. Faye came to him near dawn, wrapped in a blanket. She said nothing, just sat beside him until the light turned the snow to silver. The next day, Thomas rode out to the edge of his property, following a trail of broken grass and hoof prints that didn't belong to any of his own. He found the remains of a camp down in the ravine, ashes still warm, a flask left behind. He brought it back and handed it to Elmer in town. Elmer turned it over in his hand. He's circling you. How long can you keep him from crossing the line? I can't stop him from breathing your air, Elmer said. But I can be there quick if things go sideways. Thomas nodded once. Back at the ranch, Faye was hanging wet linens by the stove when he returned. Her sleeves were rolled up, wrists red from the wash water. She didn't ask what he'd found. She only said, "You're chilled." "I'm fine," he said, but she was already ladling stew into a bowl, setting it on the table without a word. He sat. She poured coffee. After a long moment, she said, "He's not going to leave, is he?" "No," she folded the dishcloth in her lap. "Then we'll outlast him." He looked at her across the table, the faint steam rising between them. "You'd stay through this?" "I've lived through worse," she said. "And there's nothing behind me worth returning to." He reached across the table, fingers brushing hers. "You ever think about marrying again?" She didn't answer right away. "I think about security, about the children growing up with a place that's theirs." "That's not what I asked." She looked up, eyes calm. "Yes. I do think about it." His voice was quiet. "Would you marry me, Faye?" She blinked once. "You mean that?"
Ido.
Her hand turned over, palm to his. "Then yes." They sat like that, still and sure, until Bria's footsteps came thudding down the stairs and the moment passed into something steady and real. That Sunday, they rode into town together with the children tucked between them in the wagon. Pastor Greeley met them at the chapel door with a wool scarf around his neck and a borrowed Bible in his hand. The ceremony was plain.
No flowers. No rings.
Just hands joined and vows spoken soft and clear. Afterward, they ate cornbread and boiled eggs behind the chapel under the bare-limbed ash trees. Tilda gave Faye a shawl stitched with her mother's initials. Elmer shook Thomas's hand and said nothing, but his nod lingered. On the ride back, Bria fell asleep against her mother's arm, and Boone leaned into Thomas's side, thumb tucked under his chin. "You're my pa now?" he asked. Thomas looked down at the boy. "If you'll have me." Boone nodded once, then closed his eyes. Faye rested her head against Thomas's shoulder. "We're not afraid anymore." He wrapped an arm around her. "You never were." That night, the wind rose again, but this time it carried no dread. Inside the house, there was warmth and a fire and the slow breathing of children tucked safe into quilts. Outside, the snow fell quiet across the land, and the tracks that had once marked danger faded beneath it, until there was only stillness and the promise of a new season beginning. The first real snow came heavy, blanketing the valley in silence. By early November, the fields were white and undisturbed, save for the narrow path from the house to the barn. Inside, the hearth stayed lit from dawn to dusk. Steam rose from drying laundry strung near the stove, and the children's boots, lined up neatly beside the door, were stiff with melted ice. Thomas had taken to rising earlier, lighting the fire before Faye came downstairs. She never asked him to, and he never mentioned it, but she noticed the way the room was warm when she brought out the bread dough each morning. One evening, while the wind rattled the windows with sleet, Faye sat at the table sorting through the last of the dried herbs she'd tucked away in jars over the summer. She looked up when she heard Thomas slide the latch on the front door behind him, snow melting in his hair. "You stayed out longer than usual," she said. "Had to check the west fence. Elk came through last night, knocked 2 slats loose." Boone looked up from where he was tracing letters in a slate. "Were they big?" "Big enough to leave tracks deeper than your boots," Thomas said, brushing snow from his sleeves. Faye watched him, quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking," she said, setting down a bundle of thyme. "About spring." He hung his coat and turned toward her. "What about it?" "I'd like to start a garden. Not just kitchen vegetables. Something larger." Maybe sell at the market come summer. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You have to clear more ground. I know. But I could manage it if the snow lifts early. Bria, curled on the rug with a doll stitched from scrap muslin, looked up. Will we grow strawberries? Faye smiled. If the soil's good. Thomas stepped closer. We can dig west of the chicken coop. I'll help come March. She met his eyes. You do that. I've got a stake in your strawberries now, he said. Her smile reached the corners of her eyes, and she stood to pour him coffee, hands moving without hurry. There's more, she said as she set the cup down. Elmer rode out today. Near dusk. Thomas's brow furrowed. He say why? He said Cyrus Dent left town 2 mornings ago. Packed everything, headed east. Thomas took that in without speaking. She studied his face. You believe he's gone for good? He nodded once. Men like that don't wait long when they're told no. He's not coming back to this valley. She breathed in slowly, steadying herself. Then we're free. We've been free, he said. But now there's nothing left to chase us. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, Thomas found her near the window, one hand resting lightly on the glass. I keep thinking I should feel something sharper, she said. Relief, maybe. Or anger. What do you feel? She turned to face him. Still. He stepped closer. That's the feeling you get when you finally stop running. She didn't answer, just reached for his hand. He pulled her gently toward him. You ever think how strange it is? That all it took for us to find each other was one broken promise and a storm. I think about it every day, she said. He kissed her then, slow and certain, the room quiet but for the wind outside. When she leaned into him, there was no hesitation, no fear. It felt like arriving somewhere she'd been meant to reach all along. By early spring, the soil softened and the first shoots pressed up through the earth behind the barn. Faye worked the rows in the mornings while Bria picked wildflowers nearby and Boone carved small animals from pine scraps. Thomas built a fence around the garden, not because he thought it necessary, but because he liked the way Faye smiled when she saw it. That summer, they sold beans and squash and strawberries from a cart Thomas built by hand. Faye taught Bria how to braid onions for hanging, and Boone learned to count coins better than most grown men in town. They rode into Hamilton twice a month, the children in the back, the bed of the wagon smelling of earth and sun. One afternoon in late August, after the last of the day's trade, Faye stood behind the cart wiping her hands on her apron. Thomas came up beside her, thumb hooked through his belt. You see the way Bria haggled for those carrots? He said. I think we're raising a merchant. She gets it from you, Faye replied. I never could argue with you, he said. She turned to face him. You don't have to. You just have to stay. I'm not going anywhere. She took his hand, their fingers lacing together like they'd done it 100 times before. The day was hot, but the breeze off the hills smelled of autumn. They stood there, the 4 of them, under a sky wide and blue and full of promise, the cart half empty, and the day stretched out before them like a road they'd walk together. And they did. Through every season that followed, the ranch grew. Faye planted herbs and taught Bria their names. Boone learned to ride and helped Thomas brand calves. They built a smokehouse, added a second room to the house, and never once spoke again of the man who had once stood outside their fence. Love didn't come to them like a lightning strike. It came like snow melt slow, steady, shaping everything around it. And in the end, there was no thunder, no sorrow. Only the sound of children laughing in the yard, the creak of the porch swing at dusk, and 2 people who had learned how to stay.